I've always felt like, why run a module? Because it's so constricting. That's why I game, or it's why I DM, is to give voice to my creative side. I decided to run a module just kind of on a lark to see what it would be like. And it's completely changed everything about the way that I feel about modules. And I don't know that I'll ever not run one again. I'm sure that I will do a lot of creative content making myself, but it's really changed everything about the way I view DMing. So we'll get into it as we go on.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Eliot.
And before we get started, you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliarmedia. And if you would like to help the show with supporting it, you can do so at patreon.com/alienfamiliarmedia, where any help you would be able to give us would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for joining us. We have a returning friend, Eliot, joining us for today's topic. Eliot, thanks for coming back on with us.
My pleasure. You put it rather nicely. I kind of begged my way back on.
So one of the conditions of you coming back onto the podcast was you had to supply the topic for today. So today we are going to be talking about running modules, the pros and cons of it, how best to do it. How is making a module or running a module any better or worse than creating your own scenarios? So before we get into this, let's just kind of talk about our experiences with modules. I've been doing modules since 3rd edition in one form or another. Not consistently, but I've probably done about maybe 25% of the stuff that I've run has been either directly from a module or at least inspired by a module. How about the rest of you?
I have run very few modules. Straining to remember any. I ran some Star Wars module or part of it at one point, but I didn't run the whole thing all the way through. I mostly just ripped out some stuff. What else? Any others? Not that comes to mind. I usually write things from scratch, and I'll go through modules and try to find useful bits to incorporate in some other stuff. But as far as cover to cover, I don't know if I've ever done that.
Well, the reason I recommended it is obviously because right now I've been running them for the first time, and I came of age. I think me and Jordan pretty much started playing around the same time, and I remember personally I just kind of felt like they were like a cheater way or I really had a negative opinion of running modules and even people who run modules, so it was really something I intentionally avoided. But over the years I've role played in fits and starts, and often running them, playing in several, and recently with the COVID, I put together a game that was custom made, a World of Darkness game, which was fun, and it just kind of petered out at around session 8 as I just ran out of creativity. And recently jumping into a game with you guys and a couple of others, I decided to run a module to avoid that, just kind of on a lark to see what it would be like, and it's completely changed everything about the way that I feel about modules. And I don't know that I'll ever not run one again. I'm sure that I will do a lot of creative content making myself, but it's really changed everything about the way I view DMing. So we'll get into it as we go on.
We've just been focusing on being DMs for modules. What about as players of modules? How do you feel about that? Because Jordan, you may not have run modules, but you've definitely been in them because you've been in some games that I've ran that were either based on a module or had pieces of the adventures pulled from modules. How has that been? Have you noticed that, okay, this is a point where Clayton is going just from a module versus this is stuff that Clayton created on his own? Could you tell a difference?
Apparently not, because I can't recall what you're talking about. What games did you run that had module material in it?
Well, in our Abena game, the entirety of the first the dungeon where you went in and had the army was outside, and then you defeated the army. Well, actually, that was based on the Tomb of Horrors.
Or Tomb of Horrors, that's what I meant. Yeah. Okay.
The module of all modules.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I could tell the difference there just because you never run really dungeon crawly kinds of games, or rarely do. And that is, the granddaddy of dungeon crawls, I guess. But yeah, I guess it shows up when you start asking weird questions, and you can normally tell if it's something that somebody threw together. They're probably just going to have to sit there and improvise for a minute. And if it's, premium material, of course, it's like, give me just a second to look that up. And then there's a fully detailed answer with maps and pictures and whatever else.
I don't know that I've ever played in a module. Maybe in the way back, beyond my memory, in the early days. But, just racking my brain, I really don't think I've ever played at a table where someone ran enough module content or even a module itself. I've only had the player perspective of someone who's making it from scratch.
It was a really early experience for me now that I'm thinking about it. Like back when I first started playing 2nd edition D&D, I remember playing in some Dragonlance modules that the comic shop owner at the place, you ever meet Eliot? Remember that guy?
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah. That and Twilight 2000, he ran a couple of modules with that stuff. But I think it was modules, if I remember properly. But yeah, it's one of those things that just totally went by the wayside when 3rd edition came out. We were playing with a lot of original content through all those years.
Well, I think a lot of people, at least this has been true in my experience, I like to think of role-playing games, as an art form. And I really do feel like it's a very valid form of personal expression. And so there's a part of me that's always felt like that with role-playing games and DMing especially being a creative outlet for me. I've always felt like, why run a module? Because it's so constricting. That's why I game, or it's why I DM, is to give voice to my, creative side. And so that's why I think I'm such a late adopter in my, I think I've been playing now for 20, 25 years, some off and on, and it took that long for me to even consider running a module.
Why did you consider running a module after all that time?
Well, to solve the problem of the 8-session peter out. The world of, when we started playing, it was mainly to get our minds off of COVID, me anyway. And so I approached a group that I play with online, because we had stopped playing and it had been a while since anybody had gotten together. And I was like, hey, everybody's shut in. You want to run Jordan's World of Darkness game, Because back in the day, a fairly fun and memorable game was when we all made ourselves in World of Darkness, and we placed ourselves in a zombie apocalypse in our hometown. And so I adopted that and ran it. And though we didn't make ourselves, but I told people to make average Joes. And, in a lot of ways, I just kind of stole Jordan's material. At least for the first couple sessions, and it was super fun, as games all are. But about session 8, I ran out a lot of juice. The players weren't really going. The players had some issues with cohesion, and so there was a couple dynamics about the party that were just kind of uninspiring, I guess, in a way. It was a bit murder hobo-ish, and so anywho, I just noticed that my interest was waning, and I approached somebody else to run a game. So now somebody else is running with the same group and running their own game. But I guess the itch wasn't completely scratched, so I approached you guys and a couple of newbies who had been after me to fire up their first gaming experience. They wanted to have a first gaming experience. So it occurred to me that why not just run the D&D 5e recommended intro Minds of Phandelver. And so I was like, well, hey, it's the new players, and this is for new players. So I ran it, and I really enjoyed it. And then that just led me to my other idea. I was like, well, this has been pretty fun. It's helping. I can tell that it's keeping my creative side going, and it doesn't feel too bad as far as oppressing my creative side. So I was like, why not run Ravenloft? So as you guys know, I've been pretty open about the fact that I enjoyed running the Mines so much that I really wanted to have an experience in Ravenloft, having played so long and never played it myself. And so, yeah, that's what we're doing now. We're running Curses Strahd, and it's just been a revelation for me, and I hope you guys are having fun. And, yeah, it's been great.
I'm having a blast.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. Even though I have read a little bit of the material, I actually started running a Curse of Strahd game more than a year ago, but we are past the point in the game now where that game ran out. Last year, whenever I started running it, we didn't even get to Vallaki, and that's the second town you come to in Curse of Strahd. So, everything, there are a few pieces that I vaguely remember, like I remembered the thing about the dream pies, but most of the other stuff I'm not really able to remember too much about it because it's been a year, and Curse of Strahd is such a big setting to play in that there's so many different pieces to it that, I mean, after a year, I would forget pretty much anything.
In the back, really, and another reason why I wanted to run Curse of Strahd was because I wanted more time, because I do have a world, and as you guys know, I've situated Curse of Strahd in a homebrew world that I have been generating content and history for in my spare time for years and years. And so really I wanted to run Curse of Strahd to buy myself a little more time to organize all the different disconnected fiction that I've written over the years into a cohesive storyline to really end the session. So in my mind at first it was like, well, I want to run my world the right way, like I've always wanted to, so I need some time to get it that way. And then once I started looking, because I'd never even read the Strahd book, and once I'd already committed to doing it, I found out that most people get through it in 20 to 22 sessions, which don't know I've ran a game that went longer than 22 sessions. So it's kind of changed my focus in a way. But I will say one reason why using modules is really good is it's really easy for new players to learn a system. I think that because it's weird, our dynamic, we have you two who are extremely experienced, more experienced than I am for sure, as far as keeping a game and staying in gaming. Someone like me who's kind of off and on, and then two brand new, never rolled a dice. And so I felt like the learning curve for them, especially starting with a 1 to 5, which if you're running Strahd and that's something you're interested in, it comes with a 1 to 3 entry module, which maybe in hindsight I would have done instead, called the Death House. But I'm glad we went through mines, because I think it's made, a module for people who are interested in starting a game. It makes it so much easier. And if I were a new DM, I would find everything so overwhelming. Having the mines or any entry level module would just really, it would really make or break whether or not me and my players had fun and liked gaming or not. So what would you guys think about? Think back to your first gaming experiences, and if they were good or bad. Were they modules? Were they not?
A lot of them were. And a lot of them were also in pre-existing settings, like I was saying with like Dragonlance and stuff like that. And I think the advantage to that over a homebrew, I mean, on kind of a macro level, it's probably best to introduce people to an existing setting because it's already fleshed out so much. There's no risk of, like, you're sold this idea in Dungeons and Dragons that you can do whatever you want. But if you sit down with a DM who's slapped together a world and maybe has stuff already worked out everywhere, maybe just has, a general idea and, a couple towns, but there's a whole lot of, white space on the map. If you do something unexpected, which is almost guaranteed, you kind of run the risk of like running off the map, and it shows a lot. And, a lot of times it'll be like, okay, what are you guys going to do next session? And you give a destination, and it's like, okay, well, I guess I'll slap something together over this week and, have content there for you to experience. But when you've got a pre-existing world and then on, more zoomed in level have a pre-existing scenario that you're playing through, it's sort of reassuring in a way, because I don't like putting undue stress on a DM, as a player. I like having fun, and I want everybody else to have fun. And, but I often want to go off and do wacky shit in some random direction that strikes my fancy. And it's nice to know that there's going to be stuff there, and it's not going to cause anybody any improv stress to come up with some random shit that, may or may not actually fit together and make sense.
Yeah, I feel like modules are really good, like for learning a new system, and that's not just whenever you're just learning to role play for the first time. Like anytime there is a new system that you want to play, I would advise at least reading over some sort of an introductory module. I did that whenever I did the Knights Black Agents game we played several months ago. That was a module that was in the back of that book. The first half of that scenario was all the stuff that we did in Eastern Europe was a module. So using a module to learn a system just takes the creative burden off the DM to create all of the material and allow them to just focus on the mechanics that they need to learn in order to run a new system that they're not familiar with.
One thing that I definitely feel like this is almost like a low-key, the first thing that comes to my mind is like this is kind of a low-key pitch that Jordan, maybe we ought to collaborate for an Apocalyptia module, because that's so true. It really got me back in the saddle for 5th edition, because having run the World of Darkness game, I had played for 2 pretty long-running sessions over the course of maybe 2 years, 2 long-running campaigns, but I hadn't ran 5th edition since the last time I played with you guys, and that was a one-shot, maybe 2 years ago, and then I ran maybe 10 sessions about 6 months before that, so it'd been 2.5 years since I really got in the DM's chair in 5th edition, and there was a lot of dust, especially when you get used to playing with people who have different philosophies on how familiar with the rules are going to be to run a game. You know what I mean? There's always that. I've played with a lot of DMs who are very willy-nilly about rules in general. Not that they weren't fun or they didn't have a command over it. It's just that there are some DMs who really like to hold fast to the rules, and some DMs who like to get that out of the way so they can generate content. And it really helped me get back in the saddle, for sure.
Man, I'd love to collaborate on a module for Apocalyptia. That's one of the big missing pieces to this game, as far as I'm concerned, for my game. It's that, I've got these predefined scenarios, and they're just kind of like a template to put on the existing, the default post-apocalyptic world. I built it as like a game kit without any storyline or anything attached. No, explicitly no predefined setting with characters and locations and whatever. Just very generic stuff that you can drop in. But my, dream is to one day have a really solid module for each one of the different scenarios, the zombies and robots and aliens and whatever the fuck.
Yeah, getting back in the saddle, I think I've had 2 very different experiences, though, that serve 2 good purposes. We've talked about why I ran Phandelver, but really the reason why, once I got in the habit and I was like, I tasted it a little bit, I was like, this module thing, it's pretty cool. Then I started looking for what would be just a fun, tasty module to run that is just enjoyable. And I definitely have found myself opening up a whole new doors in my experience. It's really added a whole new level of enjoyment to running, because when you run a big popular module, and these days that's just about any module is going to build a community. There's a whole community of Strahd DMs who like to fill in the gaps, and looking back on it, I found that Phandelver's the same way. So it makes it a much better experience as a DM, because if you're struggling with something or if you're finding something weak, next thing you know, you open a door to a whole world of people who also love that module and are walking the same path as you, and that's been a really fun just community to participate in.
Are there speed runs? Are people doing stuff like that?
There's definitely live plays that, I don't know that they're speed runs, but there's a whole bunch of, I know there's a podcast that I'm listening through. There's even one game that's being run right now on, they broadcast it on YouTube or Twitch or whatever, and they've invited Matt Mercer. The DM, I guess, knows him somehow or whatever, but he is Strahd. So anytime that he gets with the DM gets with him and schedules a time whenever Strahd's going to show up, and they know it's hit the fan whenever all of a sudden Matt Mercer queues up in the video chat. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's one of the main strengths of the published modules is that you have, as the game master, you have the support in the book itself, basically doing all of the really heavy lifting of creating a world, creating an adventure for you. And then you've got the support of all, like, particularly with these major published modules by Wizards of the Coast, there are so many other people who have been in your exact shoes because you are running the same game. And so it is a really good resource for having that safety net of having somebody to ask for advice, because that's a big thing that a lot of particularly early DMs or people who are learning the system, there's inevitably going to be a lot of questions, and if you're just figuring it out for yourself, it's really hard to figure out some of these answers on your own, and especially like in our most recent Strahd session, the players came across a situation
Spoiler
that was
alert.
well beyond what they were able to handle, and you being able to look up online and see, like, you said you had seen that you had read the module a little bit ahead of time and saw this happening, and you're like, there's no way the players can handle this, and then you went online to kind of get some guidance for that. I think that's a wonderful thing that is available whenever you're running one of these major published modules.
Yeah, I really don't. I just now I'm kind of realizing this is almost like a love letter / spoiler full conversation that on my side, seeing that I'm running Strahd now, so much of my experience with modules is going to come from that. Anybody who hasn't played Curse of Strahd or intends to, be aware there may be some spoilers in here, because I do want to talk about some specifics. I know I will get into some specifics where, like this last session, I think you put a good candy coating on it, but one of the drawbacks to what I have experienced is sometimes I've gotten so interested in community content that it's pulled me away from the books, and we definitely stumbled into a heck of a TPK possibility that somehow I had neglected to really read through fully. And just so you guys know, I even went online, and it was so funny is that nobody even addressed it. It's like there were definitely moments in where they were like, yeah, and this could be a TPK. And it was like, okay. I will say that definitely reading ahead, finding problems, that something that doesn't make sense to you, or like, oh, that seems like it'll be tough for the party, or I don't like how the module is segueing between these two parts of the story. Just basically Reddit. I've found such a wealth of content mainly on Reddit that I read the Reddit forums as much or more. I definitely comb over the Reddit forums more about each individual section and chapter, because you're kind of able to do both. You're familiarizing yourself with the module itself by extension, because it's discussing what's going on, but then they're also giving you a heads up about what's to come. So, but definitely don't let yourself get too far away from just reading the module, because I don't know that I would have ran that deadly encounter the same way had I fully grasped with the fact that holy cow, there are 5 CR creatures in this encounter. Okay, well, here we go.
It was really just the sheer number of those vampire spawn. If there was 2 or even 3, I feel like we had a fairly decent chance. Aside from the fact that, 2 of the party got jumped immediately, but, 6, that's incredible. If we were double level, that would have been a difficult encounter.
And maybe this is a good time to segue into some problems with modules, because if you do not have the mindset, I could see young DMs or first-time DMs in experience overall in gaming. I think that even if you're an experienced DM and you're starting a new system and you're running a module, you're going to say, ooh, this looks like it's too hard. I don't know that I agree with this. But a brand new DM who just jumps right into a module, they're going to walk through it like the gospel. And not every module is created equal, and definitely not every module's fun. There are some stinkers out there, and there are definitely some parts, especially in Phandelver, Overall, I like it, but I learned that maybe I should start tweaking it when we went to its climax, Wave Echo Cave, because I read the entire portion, and by the time I got to the end of it, I was like, this sucks. Like, this dungeon sucks. This dungeon's no fun. It's completely devoid of personality. It's more of what they've already been through. It was just so grindy. And so I found myself zhuzhing up some of the NPCs and some of the encounters and just getting rid of them altogether because they were tedious. That a first-time DM might just walk right through, and then their players, I don't know. I mean, that might be that first experience you might have to realize that you have to generate your own content. Even in a great module, even in Strahd, there are just some places you can go, some people that you meet where you're just like, wow, I really hate this character. I really hate the way they're doing this. Maybe we should do something. Maybe I should do something different.
Lost Mines of Phandelver definitely felt like playing through like the first 15 minutes of like any Bethesda game, where it's like you wake up somewhere and you learn to move around, and then you learn to pick up items, and then you learn to attack some basic thing, and like very like chunky step by step. So I guess it did what it was supposed to do, but it is definitely entry level, and it shows.
Definitely. It's like it's like when you're playing an online shooter game and you run into a bot because they have to populate bots to make the servers full. It's like every now and then you'll just encounter a situation and you can almost see its basicness just staring back at you like, oh, geez, man, that's boring.
One thing that we've kind of skirted around is like that a module can be used to, if the game master doesn't have either the time or the energy to prep for an adventure. But I feel like that kind of leads to an idea that a published module doesn't take a whole lot of prep time. And that is certainly not the case, especially for Curse of Strahd. Particularly with Curse of Strahd, I feel like a person would need to read through pretty much the entire adventure before they start running it, just so that they can see what all is going on, because there is a lot of stuff going on in Curse of Strahd.
And even though you don't have to 100% complete, and we're talking about Strahd, but I've looked into several of the others because I think 5th edition has just done it really well. I know that in 3rd edition modules were the rage. I know that, if I recall, maybe you guys can correct me, WotC made a lot of, Wizards of the Coast, the publishers of 3rd edition, they made a lot of modules, but I also remember that was a portion of the game they really opened up for third-party content creators. So there were just trillions of modules, but in 5th edition, I feel like they've kind of taken control of that a little bit more. I know there are definitely other outside people doing it, but this time around, Wizards of the Coast have really stamped their name on making complete adventures for the players, putting them in hardback, putting them in the front of their marketing strategy, and it paid off. So I'm sure it's true for all of them, but in Curse of Strahd, they may not it doesn't need to be done 100%, but there is something connected to every other part everywhere you go. So reading, I hate to monologue here, but just in my experience, Phandelver was 60 pages, and I thought that was a lot. And then, Curse of Strahd's over 300 pages, once you include all the stats and the magic items and all that extra content. And, I wish I could say that I read it from cover to cover before we had session 1, but between the online content and the book itself, I read, I think I would say 75-80% of the book itself before we got into it, and I had read about every part of the area online to get just to get the gist. And had I not done that, and if someone doesn't do that, it's going to make for a mess. It's going to make for a mess. One of the bad things about people who just make their own content, one of the drawbacks to that is it's very linear. And I think, like you said, Jordan, it doesn't take long for the world to go flat and there to be nothing on it. And and it really breaks that illusion of that, was it the third wall?
Fourth wall.
Fourth wall, there you go. But on the other hand, if you jump into a module and you don't do your prep, you're just going to make a bunch of messes and lack of continuity. You're just gonna screw it up for your players, and you're going to ruin some important aspect of the game just because you let this bad guy appear at the wrong time, or you encourage them to go to a place that just isn't very fun.
Is there, without like spoiling it, obviously, because I'm enjoying the game, but when you're reading through Curse of Strahd or any other modules you guys might have looked at, I wonder how they handle contingencies where players don't behave in kind of the linear time scale that the game is sort of built to assume. Like, what happens if somebody just decides, okay, I'm going to go over here and fuck off for 3 months and, hunt wolves in the mountains or, whatever random thing. Like, I don't get the sense that there's like a doomsday clock thing going on in Curse of Strahd. Is it just a bunch of NPCs kind of waiting around for someone to walk up and press the talk button?
Clayton, in your experiences, because once again, I'm so much of my background is just in this game, Curse of Strahd. I'm curious. I'd say you've ran more modules in general than I have. What has your experiences been?
I've definitely seen a shift over 20 years of modules being very, very linear, very set, and very little thought given to, well, what if the player characters do something else? I've seen, like, back when I very first started, there wasn't an account for that. It was just assumed you were going to, the player characters were going to bust in, take control of the situation, whether that was through combat or whether that was through negotiation, and then off to the next scene. I feel like more modern modules do have a lot better, do handle it a lot better of presenting, more presenting the modules in a way that each piece that is important can be shuffled around and moved to wherever it would make the most sense for that piece to be and relevant, so that if the player characters decide to go and do something that's not in the path laid ahead of them, those pieces are maneuverable enough that that the player characters can still interact with the pieces of the story while still feeling like they're going off in their own direction, being their own independent people. But I think there's still a lot of illusion of choice in the way that modules are written.
Picking Strahd was just a lark, because whenever that was the first module, because I knew that they had made Curse of Strahd and that it was good, and that Ravenloft was back in the D&D wheelhouse, I guess. I don't know if they made a 4th edition. I'm pretty sure they made a 3rd edition version, but it didn't really strike me. I haven't found it. But Strahd is widely considered the best that they've published for 5th. And that makes sense because historically it's considered one of the best that's ever been made, back to the 2nd edition version. But so there's a lot of what this has really done is it's made me want to dive into, because once again Strahd's 300 pages, and all of those start to finish prepackaged modules they're making are similarly large. It's made me want to go and do like a compare and contrast. And see just if this is if they're just doing modules really well right now for that reason, or if Strahd's an exception. Because, I mean, Strahd's so open. If a group of players, they get to the terribly bleak and miserable town of Barovia, and for some reason they're like, this is a great place to live. I think we're just gonna live here forever and not really take an interest. You can 100% do that. Like, there's no reason why a DM that's worth half a penny can't manage that. There are a lot of ways. So that's one advantage that really appealed to me with Strahd is, the players don't have to do anything. You could go 1 to 20 and not even interact. I don't know how fun it would be, but eventually you'd bump into something. But you could, if some players just decide to live in the world and not really pursue any of the storylines the DM or the module assumes they're going to pursue, I think it could still be an extremely fun world to play in.
Hmm.
Like if you guys came to me and said, I'd like to, I think we want like 2 months downtime. I mean, I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Like we could totally do it.
That's what I've wondered about. How on the rails are we in Strahd? Because like Clayton's running, he's running in an existing setting right now. He's running in Eberron, but you've talked about it before, Clayton. This is your experiment in just sandbox, player driven kind of campaign. And there we take 2 months downtime all the fucking time. Anytime we get some random idea and want to work on it between sessions for a while, we do that like crazy. But I was wondering, like, yeah, if we just decide to post up at an inn and start working on some shit, is Strahd just going to show up and eat us out of boredom, or what the hell's going to happen?
Well, I mean, it's that maybe, me personally as a DM, I think that, I'm assuming, Clayton, you took that upon yourself as a way to challenge yourself as a DM. Am I correct?
To challenge myself, and also because I have gotten so sick of the hurry up mentality that pretty much every role-playing game has that I've ever played in. Like, you're constantly rushing from one adventure to the next, one set-piece battle or one piece of the plot to the next, and there's just no time to breathe between them. Your characters don't actually have lives. They just have the adventure. In our Eberron game, that's what I wanted to get away from, and that's why I'm running it the way I'm running it.
I mean, that's what brings us to the DM seat in the first place, isn't it? I mean, we have a story idea, or maybe we, in this case, read a module you really want to play, and you fall in love with the content however you came to it, and you just want to share it with the players. So I'm a very pushy DM, as you've seen, and I think that's a failing of mine as well. That's somewhere where I need to grow. I don't really think a lot about downtime. I don't offer it much. And at least in Phandelver, by the time you guys had expressed some downtime desire, I just really wanted to start Strahd. So I did. There was a moment where I kind of even discouraged it. But, in Strahd, at least, and I would imagine in any game, it's good practice to get into as a DM to just calm down and slow down. And that's something, like you said, not spoilers, you guys can do whatever you want to do. I just think that in Strahd, what I've tried to do is play along with the content, because there are definitely some this happens stuff, that, okay, the players have arrived to this place. This starts the clock. You know what I mean? What the players do on the clock or with the time that ticks by is up to the players. But, the module definitely allows for you to say, okay, they've gone to play place X, these 3 things begin to happen. Or they enter Barovia, you need to be aware that this starts the clock on these large-scale things. But it's not so closed up that there are some things that if the players were like, we're going to take a week off, or we're going to take 2 weeks off, things will have to happen in that time that will affect them in the world, but those things can come and go. And when you're generating your own content, that's really hard to do, because if you build your story around some overarching plot line and it's time sensitive, the last thing you want to hear your players say is, yeah, I don't really want to go there, so let's just go, I just want 2 weeks to take a breather.
Yeah.
And then you panic, you're like, but
fine, okay, the zombies are going to rise, and the fucking asteroid's going to hit the planet, and the god of death is going to rise out of hell, and you guys just fucked the whole world, so I hope you like your downtime.
And that's such a shitty thing to do. So you definitely have to take a breather as a DM and be like, do I really want this to happen? Maybe this just doesn't happen, and hold it back for a later time. I mean, it's hard for me to speak on this with too much experience, because since you guys have been in Barovia, it's only been like 3 days in 5 sessions in Barovia, and the last session took an astounding 6 hours of in-world time, start to finish, which is crazy. So it's real sweaty. I that's something that I definitely want to slow down a bit.
So Eliot, one of the things that you've been doing really, really well with Curse of Strahd that most people who are planning on running a module could definitely take some notes from you is integrating the player characters into the story of whatever module it is, because that's a big criticism that I have of most modules in the way that they are written, is that they are designed to have just minimal options for the player characters to be a part of what is going on. There's not really integration of who the player characters are into the setting. So like in most modules, it really doesn't matter what class and race I make my character to be. The story is going to be the same, and the story is going to play out in the same manner, regardless of what options I've chosen. And I feel like with Curse of Strahd, you went that extra mile to make Jordan's character's background relevant to the story. You took a couple of other characters and made their presence in Barovia a very important thing that other people are taking note of, and it's an important thing that makes the setting feel like it has some life to it, and that our characters are a part of that life.
Well, make no mistake, I thought about that a lot going into it. Every single one of you, whether it's been completely, I mean, I've hooked everybody. I put everybody in this world. I think that's important to do as in any game, because once again, as a DM, I think looking back on it, if I had to just make a binary choice about it, I think custom-made modules has a chance to fall into this even worse, at least in games I've played. I definitely have played with a lot of DMs who love their stories a heck of a lot more than they love their players.
Oh, yeah.
And holy crap, I'm really bad for that. I mean, usually when I come to the table, it's because I really want to tell a story. But I've just learned over the years that there's nothing worse than sitting at a table and realizing I'm not the main character.
Maybe slight rephrase, not so much that they love their story more than they love their players, but they definitely love their story more than they love their players' characters.
Let's drop some content into this jam. The players, for a lot of DMs, are the means to an end of telling a story.
Yep.
And whereas I'm 100% of the camp that's like, the players need to be the story. The players need to be the focus. And at the end of the day, I'm glad you're running, dog, but I really don't care about your world. I care about my place in your world and how I can me personally, just be a hero. I like being a hero in games, you know? And so if I feel like my presence is unnecessary, you know, it's hard for me to stay involved in the game.
I will care about a world if it matters that I'm there, if it makes any difference who I am, but yeah, like you were saying, if I could have made a completely different character with a completely different backstory and skill set and whatever, and it would have went pretty much the same fucking way, like, it's not hard to see through that, and it, yeah, definitely gives you the impression, like, why am I even bothering? This is some weird, like, I don't know, this is rote.
Well, and you know, I think this is a common trope that if anybody's listening who's maybe new in the game and really wants to up the quality of play, if you're a DM, whether it's a homebrew or a module, it doesn't matter what the content of the module says. Every single one of your players should have a vested interest, and that should be generating new content for that reason. Either co-opting an NPC that's pivotal and saying, you know what, if I can make this a PC instead, that's better. Or if need be, just completely write in a new segment of the game that makes that player's success or failure in their own individual path pivotal to the success of the game. And that's the way Strahd is. Every single one of you, I had to generate. I either co-opted characters or parts of the game and just made a direct connection to you, or I've just added content that greatly hinges on the whole party's ability to succeed in the module. So if it hasn't been revealed to everyone, Clayton, it will be, because every single person has a big stake in this game.
I really don't think that's too much to ask out of a DM. Like, my opinion on this has changed over the years. At one point, and I think I've seen this a lot where, DMs will complain about like my players just don't want to do anything or whatever. But if the DM's not providing a hook tailor-made for each character, it shows that they don't give a fuck. And there's a whole set of archetypal characters that are specifically constructed around the idea that I don't want to be doing this thing. I'm trying to rescue a loved one, or, some hard-bitten detective that's just burnt out, or, some, totally traumatized vet doesn't want to go back to fighting anymore. There's a million characters like that, and they're fun to play. And unless there's something in the storyline that forces them to come out of their comfort zone, like, that's the call to action. This is classic Joseph Campbell, hero arc stuff. And yeah, if you're not providing that, then you're just trying to jerk off in a bunch of people's ears, I think.
I also want to add that the player also has some responsibility in that to provide to the game master some ideas of what those hooks could be.
For sure.
Like if you're playing one of those, like a PTSD vet who just doesn't want to get into the shit again,
mm-hmm.
How do I as a game master provide a hook to you if I don't know how to hook you in? If I don't get hardly any backstory besides, oh, this shit was terrible, how do I know to bring that character in? And that's where a conversation needs to happen between the player and the game master when the character is being made of, okay, this character is going to be really hard to get involved into this adventure that is coming up. How can we deal with that?
No doubt. Yeah. And whatever that thing is, whatever that lever is that you can pull, that is the most important thing to that character. And that's one of the most interesting things about the character. So yeah, can't forget that part.
I mean, I think that every DM has their strengths and their weaknesses. And so I think I think sometimes a player, I'm the biggest, I just, went on a big spiel about how the players ought to be taken care of by the DM. But I do think that sometimes that does go a little bit far. And like you were saying, Clayton, it's important for the players to consider their role as well. I know that if I have a player at the table, which thank God, I can't even think the last time I did have this player, but I have in the past, who just isn't with us. They're not really generating much content. They're not engaging much. I don't know. I know a lot of people who just love the video game aspect of crunchy fighting stuff. Those types of players who get their kicks in combat and stuff like that, they can be not very story driven, not very interested in generating their own content. I think that once you give that player a couple hooks and you do your part as the DM, if either they don't bite on them or they don't really counter propose, what I mean? Does that make sense? If they don't find their own way to pursue something there, it's interesting story wise. I mean, I think that sometimes you just kind of got to let that person be bored.
Or maybe they're not bored. I mean, it's entirely likely
true.
that they're completely content to, stand around being the silent mountain of muscle that's just there to be the leg breaking goon when it's time to break legs, and they don't really give a fuck about the plot line. And if they don't have a problem, then I don't think there's a problem.
I want to ask Clayton a question because I want to tie that into a pro and a con about modules. But you had mentioned in your Eberron game, you've even adopted a very indulgent like magic item loot philosophy. How's that going for that game as far as magic items? Because that's something I'm thinking a lot about right now in my game.
Well, right now, the players who are taking full advantage of the ability to craft magical items are definitely getting to the point where they are mechanically far above the player or players who just, that's not interesting to them. So that's the only real downside that I'm seeing.
I think that, one downfall about running the modules as they're written, because obviously the creators of the modules don't know the players, and they leave it up to the DM to kind of make it special for the individuals. But if you don't have that mindset, the loot and the distribution of magic items can really quickly, leave people out. So I would highly suggest any module you run, and this didn't dawn on me until about halfway through Phandelver, was that, if you don't take control as a DM of making sure that one person doesn't get, run out of control with, there's always going to be that player who maybe they find the +1 sword and the +1 armor. They don't share that information with the party. They just don it, and then lo and behold, they get the cloak of invisibility that maybe the game was written should be for this for the wizard, but hey, I'm a fighter, I can use that too. And next thing you know, there's this Superman walking around in the party, and everybody else is still wielding their stock short swords.
I don't know who the fuck you guys are talking about.
No, I mean, in my game, from Phandelver, I mean, you got some decent loot, and our paladin definitely lucked out finding a +1 weapon that was written into that. That's really served him well. But that's why at the end of my last session, I even, compelled you guys to maybe make a short list of things. I know, Clayton, you had done that with some spells, and I appreciated that because, I don't want a player to sit at my table who doesn't feel like they're giving they're missing a piece that the DM just will not give to them. So it's been helpful for me because I can build those things into the story. But still, even... I just asked you guys if there was anything that you would like. Make me a short list of like your dream items you would have right now, and no promises, but wink, wink. Because I want everybody to feel equally empowered to the extent that they can have fun. And I think a module running them as is could definitely lead to an unfun component if you just let people hoard magic items and don't share the wealth.
Since we do have a couple of players who are pretty new to Dungeons and Dragons, period, with this potential new loot coming their way, definitely reach out to them and just kind of give them suggestions, or just go flip through the Dungeon Master's Guide and just look and see what kind of just interesting magic items are there that you think that they might be able to use or enjoy getting. Because in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there are some magic items that, if you think about it for just a moment, that's a really fun thing to have. It's not going to be useful, but it's definitely going to be fun.
Oh, I definitely fall down on that for sure.
There's a lot of stuff, I think, I've gone all over that magic item list, and in the tiers of like common and uncommon magic items, especially, aside from those real basic things like +1 sword, +1 armor, +1 shield, whatever. Aside from those, everything else in that tier, I don't think any of it's particularly game breaking, and a lot of it is like just weird utility kind of stuff that's just sort of fun to have. I don't think any combat is ever gonna get broken because somebody's got like slippers of spider climbing or some random shit like that. Like, some of it's just, neat stuff to have in case something comes up. Bag of holding, for instance. Great item.
That's something that I'm coming around to. Another one of my biases since the beginning of my gaming is that I really don't like random tables. Just because I've been that player who, it came to my turn that I could tell the DM just like rolled on the chart for my character. Okay, well, it's Eliot's turn to get a magic item. I wonder what he's going to get. And he rolls, and it's like, say I'm a 5th level fighter, and they're like, cool, you've got like glasses of, I don't know, I can't even think. But I remember I got a set of glasses in a game that were like, I don't know, they were trash. It was like, it kept illusions. The DM never used illusions in the first place in the game, so if I put them on, I could tell there's illusions around. So I ended up being this dorky fighter with stupid looking glasses on all the time that never showed me anything. But on the other hand, that book can be a bit overwhelming in that way. And so I think that that's a good way to, and I think that everybody should definitely have because the best game I ever played was a game where early on I got a magic weapon that as the game progressed, it revealed more powers, and that was how the DM ran it, was everybody had a special implement. And man, I just felt so special because I had this weapon that was, it had a backstory, and it was rooted in the game world, And it made me feel like somebody, even though I got it at level 2 or something like that. But it ended up being like my main weapon, I mean, till the end of the campaign. But at the same time, I very often I don't give out the little things, usually. I don't just populate the world with a lot of cool little, like the knickknacks you guys are talking about that add a lot of spice. I've never had a bag of holding in a game. I've never had a deck of many things. Is that what they're called?
Yeah, yeah.
Those types of things that most people have stored, Ring of Wishes. I mean, that's a powerful one, but most people seem to have experiences with those. And as a player and as a DM, I've just never done it. So that's a good advice.
I think those scaling magic item kind of things that you're talking about, Eliot, is a big opportunity that, for whatever reason, has just been consistently squandered over the years with Dungeons and Dragons design. I feel like they've tried to get away from it in 5th edition, the mindset of magic items as like disposable commodities that you just buy and sell and create, and it's no big deal. But you're right, like getting some big quest sword, right away, and then having it grow with you instead of having to throw away the +1 sword when it's obsolete and look for the +2 and then the +3 and yada yada. Yeah, it's much more interesting when it becomes a part of your character.
So I don't remember how magic items are handled in Curse of Strahd, but in previous, well, I guess I don't remember. I'm not sure how it's handled in 5th edition, period. But like in 3rd edition, you got a module and it had magic items in it. It specifically said this encounter has a +1 longsword that this particular enemy is wielding. Then in 4th edition, it had a particular module there is a level 6 magic item here at this place. You can determine that yourself, or you can roll for it, or you can pull from the player character's magic item wish list, which is a thing from 4th edition that I think was a really good design decision, to have character wish lists that was part of your character. How is it done in Curse of Strahd? How are magic items dealt out?
Well, anybody who has much familiarity with Curse of Strahd, magic items play a key role in the greater storyline. And not to be too spoilery, because I definitely don't want to reveal too much on this particular topic, but but I'm sure that every module's like that. There's 4 or 5, like, not only are they in the world, but they're pivotal to the game for them to be found and wielded. Wielded.
But are there any other items besides those quest items?
Yeah.
Are there any other magic items that are in Curse of Strahd?
Yeah, there are, and it's very much the 3rd edition philosophy. Fandelver was the same. In fact, it's so much so that it's almost like you can miss them as a DM, because one drawback to modules, and not to get too much into this again, but they can be tedious to read in that they're structured when you go to a town, say, or a region, or a dungeon. Every single room is labeled on the map, and each one has a description that you read to the players that then has more text that describes some important things the DM needs to know about the rooms or places. And it can be a bit daunting, because when it gets to the treasure, they usually put the treasure in the same spot. I mean, and you can totally just miss, if you're just kind of scanning and not reading it word for word, which can be difficult to do just from the boredom standpoint. There's a +2 sword of, fireballs, you know what I mean? It's just right there in this tiny little flavor text, and you're like, oh, really? That's here? Cool. But that's kind of something I dislike. I would rather, if it's something cool, leave it there, but definitely, I'm definitely of the opinion, having done it now, that be generous. I would rather err on the side of be generous and be like, if I feel like it's time to give the players an opportunity to have some better loot, I would rather know something they like and give it to them, or put it there, or go find it myself and make sure that it's there and it's clearly like, oh, this is clearly something that's going to make this player's experience much better. And, if you need to just take something else out of the book, then fine, or just leave in everything else. But there's a lot of magic items sprinkled into Strahd for sure.
So we're past an hour. Do we have any other points we want to attempt to cover, or do we want to go into geek things?
Well, the last word, I think we've talked a lot about modules. I don't know if we've ever actually just had a would you do it, should you do it, since I volunteered this topic. I think if I had to just put a pin in it, definitely run modules, definitely turn to modules to get inspiration. Maybe not like you do, Clayton. Pick up, maybe run part of it. If you need to add some content, why not just go get a side quest or a main part of your storyline from a pre-existing book? I've had so much fun learning about the game. I've had so much fun adapting it. I've generated as much personal my-made content in Strahd as I would have in my normal games. And so it just makes, I feel like it's been a really great experience. And if you were like who I was and just generally had a distaste for them, thought they were kind of lazy, they don't have to be if you don't want them to be. I highly recommend delving into the modules for inspiration at the very least, or just take one on. They're fun, and they make the game last longer.
Yeah, and with all the digital resources that are available for free online, definitely for D&D and also for most of the other major systems, there are people out there who are publishing material. A lot of it is behind a very small paywall, like on Drive-Thru RPG or the DM's Guild or something like that. But then there is a lot of material out there that is free. And one of the things that I do with the modules is I just have a catalog of material that I have that I look through whenever I'm looking for inspiration, and either I may take the entire module and use that, or I may take a piece of it and use that. And that's something I've been doing since 3rd edition. I had a subscription to Dungeon Magazine when it was a physical thing, and I did that all the way up through 4th edition. Whenever they went to digital tools, I downloaded the Dungeon Adventures there, and that's still a great wealth of material that I still look back on and draw from whenever I'm designing my adventures. My Thursday game is basically a series of adventures that I pulled from 4th edition Dungeon Magazine.
Awesome. So Jordan, let's get on making one for Apocalyptia then.
Sounds good, man. I'm down.
All right, with that, let's move on to geek things. Eliot, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Recently I found the Umbrella Academy. If you haven't seen it, which I know a lot of people have, I can't endorse it anymore. It's great. Go back and watch season 1. They just dropped season 2, and I binged them both. When I first found it, I watched the first season from front to back, and then when I found out they were going to release the sequel season, I did the same. And it's just as if you've seen the first one and haven't seen the second season, get to it. It's great.
For my geek thing, I recently found this show on Amazon Prime. It's called Fortitude, and it's I kind of think of it as like a weird sort of hybrid of like Twin Peaks and The Thing almost. Like it's less goofy than Twin Peaks, but it's that standard story of small isolated town. There's a murder. Somebody comes in from outside and starts investigating and uncovering all the weird dramas and things that are going on. But it's set on a fictional island somewhere in the Arctic Ocean that is supposed to be owned by Norway, but it's this multinational population of a few hundred people, and it gets really weird. Like it's sort of it hints supernatural things, but I'm 2 seasons in and I still couldn't tell you if magic is real or not in this world. There's a lot of weird shit to do with like ancient virus stuff, in the permafrost and whatever. But it's a real good, like, slow burn, tense horror kind of thing. Very like Lovecraftian feels, and man, when it gets gory, it pulls no punches. It's like, holy fuck, I can't believe I just saw that on TV. This is fucking awesome. So yeah, it's like a BBC thing, I think, is where it came out of. But yeah, give it a look. It hooked me almost immediately. So Fortitude, it's pretty sweet.
And I've got 2 YouTube channels that couldn't be more dissimilar that I'm going to do as my geek things. The first one is Tempo Knot Time Lapse. They take time-lapse photography of various different things. There's a lot of videos of different foodstuffs rotting away, and I love that shit. The one that caught my eye, that got my attention, was they took it looked to be like maybe 10 or 12 ounces of tomato juice in a glass, and they did a 6-month time lapse of what happens to it. So you get to watch over the course of 5 minutes the 6 months pass of the like all the bacteria and fungal growth in it, and then you just see the amount of liquid in it start to decrease, and this floating thing of living matter just slowly sinks down until it sucks up the last little bit of juice in the bottom of it. Oh my god, it is so satisfying and so gross to watch.
That's awesome. I watched a channel that does that. Like I think they did that with beef. Like, you know how you can like slow age, or I don't know what it's called, but where you just kind of vacuum seal and age beef, and they just do it to extremes, and then they eat it. Ugh. And some of it you're just cringing, like, I can't believe they're putting that in their bodies.
Nobody eats this shit on time lapse or on Tempo Not Time Lapse. The other YouTube channel is it's Stephen Fitzgerald's YouTube channel. He does little skits that star himself, and only himself. They're usually about 30 seconds. Some of them are a little shorter. I think the longest one is like 2 minutes long. It's hit or miss, but there are some really good hits in there. And you can watch the 3-year backlog of this channel in an afternoon, because everything is only 30 seconds long.
I know what I'm doing tonight.
All right, guys. Well, you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
We'll have to have you back.
Adios.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.